Growing for Market podcast.
Doing things that are not good for the soil also have huge impacts in a lot of different ways. Then we start to see our soils become depleted, and then we think, we need to add some fertilizers. And so the easiest way to add a fertilizer is to do it synthetically. They're easy to manage. You just pour this cup of this into here and you spray and it's all wonderful. But unfortunately, those synthetic fertilizers are also not food for microbes. So microbes won't eat that nitrogen that is being applied. They won't eat that phosphorus that's being applied. We have to be thinking about feeding the soil in a way that actually feeds the soil, not just feeding plants, not just creating the most beautiful blemish-free product that we can, because that beautiful blemish-free product is really a result of like a genocide of like microbial life. It's crazy.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm April Parms Jones, your host and a writer for Growing for Market magazine. For 33 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait until you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people to find the podcast. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
We know it's peak season. You're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free, instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer.
Hello, and welcome to Growing for Market podcast. I'm April Parms Jones, and I am so excited to have you guys here. We are interviewing today Megan Ayers. She's a first-generation farmer from the beautiful state of Indiana, and she started out with urban agriculture, and then she expanded into a larger farm in southeast Indiana. Megan's passion has been focusing on bringing conventionally farmed land to a more regenerative and sustainable landscape. And we are just ecstatic to have her today because we're going to talk about conservation-minded practices and her experience on revitalizing the land. Megan, thank you so much for having us.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I mean, I think that this is such an important topic. I personally am a farmer in Akron, Ohio, and I have, as you started out, a small little acre of land, not even an acre, like a half an acre. And I've had to use so many regenerative practices to get the land to where I need it to go so I can grow every day. So I'm super excited to talk about your sustainable journey. And, I'm sure our listeners are going to learn a lot.
Well, I kind of think of farming as the ultimate lifelong journey profession. No matter how many times you do it, no matter how good you get at it, something is going to fail. You're going to learn a tough lesson, whether you want to or not. And just when you think you have it all figured out, you learn something totally new that just changes everything and really blows your mind. So yeah, happy to share whatever I have, but who knows? You could definitely teach me something.
It's going to be a fun journey. So can you tell me about what drew you to the land and starting the farming journey?
Oh, okay. Kind of weird. No shade at my mom, but we didn't eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables as kids. She came out of that generation where, canned and frozen were easy and quick. And so having parents that worked full-time jobs plus overtime, that's how we did dinner. And gosh, I thought it was gross. So I thought I hated vegetables and fruit for a very long time. And I have a very vivid memory of sneaking into my neighbor's tiny backyard garden when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, seeing this like bright red thing on a plant that I thought was, maybe it's a gumball or, something that I was familiar with. And I plucked it off, and I knew that it was food because she had told me, like she was growing food, it's her garden, etc. Her name was Carol, and she let me taste it. And I popped it in my mouth and I chomped down, and this flavor explosion happens in my mouth. And I thought, like, how in the world is there candy growing out of the ground, and it was just a ripe cherry tomato. And that just stuck with me for the rest of my life. But it was way back there. And as I grew up and I moved to my first apartment and met some people in college who, grew plants and talked about gardening, I thought, oh, like regular people can do that? So I started my first little garden in the ground back in like 2002, 2003, 2004, just in the middle of the city. We were in this really urban area, but happened to have like just a square of yard. And I thought, hey, I'll try it. So I just spent a terrible afternoon in early June digging things up and planting seeds and hoping that something would grow. And like everything grew, and it was amazing. And it tasted delicious. And I even discovered that we had natural corn smut in our soil. So that was also a learning experience. But ever since then, I've always kept a garden. And then when my husband and I bought our first house like 10 years later, I think it was 2013, again, small urban lot, but significantly larger, like a 10th of an acre instead of like a 20th of an acre. And I mean, before I even broke ground, I bought 3 chickens, and I was, ready to start this journey. And I just did a bunch of research because it was such a small environment to grow in. And I was just growing in raised beds that I learned about like why the soil health was really, really important, and what I could do to grow as much food as I could in the smallest amount of space, because we also had dogs and chickens, and I planted an orchard, and I ended up with way more food than I needed. So then I thought, okay, so I guess farmers markets are next. So I started selling to farmers markets, I believe in like 2014. And then I think I started a CSA maybe the next year. And then it just kind of rolled from there. So I did that for 4 or 5 years, just in addition to my regular full-time job. And it felt like a really great way to unwind and relax and help me, get my thoughts together. So I didn't think of it as an income source. I thought it more of a therapy source, in a way to just connect with the land, get my hands dirty, stretch, just enjoy the quiet sounds of nature. And then in late 2019, my husband ended up getting what he thought was his like dream job, but it was in a totally different state, in a different part, of the world, not that far, maybe like 90 minutes away from us, where we were in Cincinnati. And so I thought, if he was going to get to have his dream job in Louisville, then I get to have my dream piece of land. So we made a pact that we would move to the country, and he was very, very generous and agreed to commute an hour to work every day so that we could live on some land. And so I started looking for land and could not find a thing in the greater Louisville area, because that is high value land for horse people and for development. And I'm sure you've talked to other farmers, land access is a real problem. And we thought, wrongly, that finding a small farm would be so easy. And so we looked for a long enough time that we ended up being homeless, because we had sold our home and then we had to move out of our home and we still didn't have a place to live. And I was just really lucky to have the support of some friends. Shout out to my friend Leah. Thanks, Leah, who let us live with her for a month or two while we found a place. But we ended up in Indiana, southeastern Indiana, on just a little chunk, 11 acres, with a tiny falling down house on it. Not a tiny house, but a house under 1,000 square feet that was in terrible shape. And it was kind of just right place, right time, and desperation. So we moved out there. Yeah, I guess the rest is history. When we moved in, it was just a field, a muddy field with some corn stovers left over from the previous season. It was gray clay, smelled terrible, just like a lot of anaerobic activity because of the compaction. And I started from there, just utilizing some soil health practices to start small and get bigger. And so now, 5 years later, I've got about an acre in orchard, about a quarter of an acre in berries, 2 acres in market garden, about a half an acre of sugar maples so that I can tap. And then I've also done a hedgerow because I'm surrounded by conventional corn and soy farms that are heavy sprayers with drones and airplanes. So there's just a lot of drift that I deal with. And then we also have chickens and geese that we rotate, and we just got 2 Kune pigs maybe 1 week ago. Very excited about those guys, but they're not for food, but to be our farm friends and to help with, land improvement. I'd also like to bring in some sheep and just rotationally graze those guys through the areas of our land that get essentially zero use, that are, yes, habitat for like quail and bugs and other creepy crawlies that we love, because the whole point is to create an area that is abundant with life rather than to kill all the life so that we can make human food. I really like to think about it as a system, trying to mimic nature as much as possible, the most diversity that I can encourage, essentially, and hopefully some of that encouragement can be human food or food for the animals that live around us. That was a lot, sorry.
No, it was a lot. I was taking fabulous notes, so we can kind of segue bit by bit throughout our conversation. I would like to first start talking about relaxation. I feel like we all need to relax and enjoy ourselves. And there's just so much going on in the world in general that having access to the land, to a garden, to a little plot in a community garden. Can you talk more about how you've been able to use your land access of having land to relax and unwind, and a therapy and a workout?
That's a great question. It is, if you struggle with downtime, do not farm, because there's always something to do, right? No matter what, something is broken, you're always behind. And so there's a really interesting dichotomy in like utilizing this lifestyle to be mentally healthier while also dealing with the stress of, I have to get these plants in the ground by this time if I want to, like meet the needs of my customers. But I think that overall, it's a mindset shift. I have to put my brain into the rhythm of the season. I have to not fight against what the earth is doing. I have to work with it. And so I think it's human nature to struggle against the tide to try to make it be the way we want it. And that's really difficult, and it's frustrating, and it's stressful, and it causes you feelings of anger, and maybe even you start to talk badly to yourself because you're not getting it done. But I found that over time, when I've just accepted that, hey, we've had an incredibly wet spring. I'm not going to get anything into the ground because I can't get a wheelbarrow to where I need to go because it's too heavy and it just sinks in the mud. That's just reality, and I have to just let it go. And that's been incredibly helpful. Additionally, I think that because everything that I do by hand. I don't have a tractor. The biggest piece of machinery I have is a ride-on mower. And boy, do I wish I did have a tractor. But because I have to do everything by hand, it's very active, and it's a lot of resistance work. So picking up heavy bags, rolling wheelbarrows around, digging in the earth, getting dirty, being sweaty, lots of stretching and movement. It just feels good. Even if I'm, sunburnt and sweating and covered in mosquito bites, at the end of the day, it's a job well done. I can see what I've done. And I think those of us who work in other professions where we never really see the work that we do, it's just sitting down at a computer and doing 75 emails and answering the phone, or even working on a long-term project and just being that tiny cog in that project. In farming, you get to see the labor of your work almost immediately. It's magical. You put a seed in the ground and gosh, it grows. And every single season, I'm just overwhelmed by the magic of that process. I did nothing. And I have food. It sounds silly to be amazed by it after, over 20 years of doing it, but it overwhelms me because it's helpful to me, because it feeds my community. I get to nourish them with, I say, very little effort. No, that's wrong. Of course, there's huge effort that goes into it every day for months and months and months, but it doesn't feel like a lot of effort because there is that rightness to it, because it does mimic the seasons. It mimics the rhythm of nature. And so despite the fact that I'm sure everyone you talk to just talks about that toll, that work, that stress, that farming, especially small scale farming, takes, because the larger scale, of course, also stressful, also a lot of time, and different kinds of stresses. On the small scale, because it's often not mechanized, or not mechanized that much, we're relying almost entirely on our own bodies. And I'm not a spring chicken. I'm 45, and I don't know how much longer my body is going to cooperate with me. But I know that no matter what happens, I can scale what I grow to my ability. And that's another part of this job that's really unique. You can't do that in other professions. You can't say, well, now that I'm 60, I won't do my job. You can still do it when you're 60. You can do it when you're 70, when you're 80. And it's one of those professions where time and experience can be passed down to younger people, and be it 5-year-olds like me stealing tomatoes, or 25-year-olds coming out of college and not knowing what they want to do, or even 45-year-olds who were in a profession and have decided maybe this isn't for me anymore. Because that's kind of what I did. When we moved to Indiana, it was right when COVID hit, and COVID kind of broke me, and I was in education before that, and I was just seeing how my students were not responding to anything really. And so I just felt like I could be more useful feeding people than I could be teaching them where a period goes or when to use a semicolon. So while I still have a full-time job and I get to work in agriculture, which is really lucky, and I really love my full-time job working with urban soil health as an urban and small-scale soil health specialist, in my heart of hearts, I'm all farmer. It's very much more it's like a vocation. It's not a job, because it's a part of who I am. It's an identity, and this is going to sound very woo-woo, like it's a holy practice where we get to care for other people in this really unique way by nourishing them, by creating a community surrounding that food, by talking about the ways in which they can too engage in this practice. There was a farmer that I used to work with at a farmer's market. Her name is Nancy. Shout out to Nancy. She used to say that at the farmer's market, we sell 10 pounds of produce but they get 20 pounds of education. And so I just always took that with me, because when I'm selling food at the market, I'm talking, oh, here's my tomato, here's my squash, my celery, my carrots. But really what we're talking about is, how can we get this raw ingredient into your body? And so we talk about cooking, we talk about preserving, we talk about even how easy it is to grow something like this. All you need is a 1 gallon pot and some sunlight. So sorry, that was a tangent, but feel free to stop me at any time.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel-framed end walls, roll-up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands-on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops.
This is Nathan from Tilth Soil. The other day, I told a friend that I think any product advertised on a podcast is probably a scam. And now I get to eat my words, because I really do think it's worth talking to serious growers about living soil. But instead of listening to me bloviate about root development or trace minerals, you're probably better off just trying it out. Go to tilthsoil.com/GFM to request a sample of our seed starting mix and see what your plants think. If you're not impressed, then forget we exist. But if you like what you see, then reach out and we can get into the details. Whether you need a yard, a truckload, or want help organizing a group buy, call or text Josh at 216-870-0642. And yes, I am reading his personal cell phone number in a podcast ad. All right, play the jingle.
I'm in my garden, the sun is shining, my plants are thriving in tilth soil.
And now, back to the show. I think those are excellent points to talk about how the food really is nourishing your spirit and your soul and the community, making it more resilient, make it more robust, making it, more economically viable, because if you're healthy, then you maybe have less health issues, and then you're able to enjoy your life more. You're able to show up for your workplace and be more productive. You have less sick days. I mean, we can go on and on and on. So food is definitely very viable to our economic and spiritual and happiness in general. I agree. And I love that you spoke about how caring for the land actually cares for you and your whole body, and as a stress relief and as a workout. And I really enjoyed how you talked about this is something that you can do until the end. You can always scale up, you can scale down, you can bring in helpers and assistants, and you have so much knowledge that you can share and pass on as you are learning your own agricultural knowledge. So I think that's all very insightful. I would love to talk more about the soil and how you were able to elevate the soil, make it more productive for you in your smaller space of urban farming, but then also in your larger space as well.
Yeah. So when I was in Cincinnati growing in just raised beds, the first thing that I did was learn about companion planting and how some plants just like to be neighbors. And, just like humans, some of us get along and some of us just don't. So I just followed those principles and also thought about a good crop rotation. I learned about which plants take up a lot of nitrogen, take up a lot of phosphorus, which put that nitrogen back in. And I learned about soil microbes, though, gosh, there is just so much to know. I feel like such a newbie talking about it, but learning about the various beneficial microorganisms that live in our soils and how we can farm or grow or even just steward them into having the best lives that they can, that as a direct result of their happiness, they give us those nutrients in the soil for our food. And so with healthier soil microbiology, we have healthier food. And if we have healthier food, then we have healthier people.
So what would be the strategy to grow out and have more healthy microbes in your soil?
Great question. That's all about soil organic matter. When I think about growing food, a lot of people, we talk about like, oh, we want to feed our plants. But no, we want to switch that messaging on our heads. We want to feed our soil. So the best way to feed your soil is to give it soil organic matter, give it the appropriate carbon to nitrogen ratio. So soil microbes like a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 8:1. I'm sure you've already read all this information, so I'm not going to turn into teacher Megan here. But there's a lot of ways that we can get our soils to have that soil carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, the first way is utilizing mulches, right? So we always want to keep our soil covered no matter what. So soils that can see the sun are soils that are going to be weedy. They're going to be dried out prematurely, and they are going to be erosion prone. So if we can cover with a mulch, be it straw, hay, wood chips, like in our pathways, not in our actual garden beds, or even my favorite mulch to use is plant-based compost. So rather than utilizing something that's big and heavy, I really love a plant-based compost because it increases that soil organic matter. It's closer to that carbon to nitrogen ratio, whereas like a higher carbon product is going to take longer to break down, so works very well as a mulch. However, because it's very high in carbon, our soil microbes are going to say like, well, I'm tired of eating this carbon. I want more nitrogen. I'm going to go over here where there's nitrogen. So often what people report is that, oh, I put on all of this mulch and then my soils did poorly. And essentially what that means is that the soil microbes didn't get the nutrients that they needed. There wasn't enough nitrogen available. So with regard to that soil organic matter feed. And so what they did is they just ate all the excess nitrogen from the previous season. And so come spring, there's no nitrogen available in those soils. So a great way to feed those soil microbes besides mulches is also to keep living roots in the ground. And the way that you do that is, of course, is come fall, come winter, rather than ripping out your old plants, just leave them there. Leave them there because they're going to be food sources both for those microorganisms in the soil, but also invertebrates that are going below the soil surface and coming back up, as well as other bugs, other invertebrates like slugs and snails, which are then food for larger insects, and birds, which are then food for larger birds. the whole soil food web, right? And so another way that we can keep living roots in the ground, if you're, say, like not too sure that you want to do that, is to plant cover crops. So that's another soil health principle. Planting cover crops is a great way to fix nitrogen in the soil, to get rid of compaction, to get rid of that erosion problem. It keeps soils covered. And then some cover crops are winter kill. So you don't have to worry about a termination strategy in the spring. You can just let the cold weather kill those cover crops, and that plant residue acts as a natural mulch in the spring. All you have to do is move it out of the way and transplant your plants in, or direct seed, depending on what kind of mulch you have. Like if you have a cereal rye, well, I shouldn't use cereal rye as an example because we're talking about winter kill cover crops. But if you have, say, like a field pea or like an oat, what I love is a field pea, oat, and daikon radish all together, planted in August or September. Allow it to grow up, do its thing, and then once it's super cold, it'll die. Come spring, you've got all that great plant material on top of the soil, so your soils were covered all winter long. You've got roots in the ground, but you've got your mulch, and you've got food for your soil microbes over the winter. So it's a win-win-win-win.
I love it. I love it. Now that's something that I haven't talked to a lot of guests about, which is feeding the actual soil. I mean, we've talked about companion plants and crop rotation, but really thinking about how you can feed your actual soil and making that your primary focus, and focusing on the carbon to nitrogen ratio, 8-1. I love all of that. And the cover crops and mulching and covering the soil and using plant-based compost, which I'd never thought of. That's amazing. And keeping the living roots. I love that idea of keeping it in the ground, because I always have that notion of like, I want it to be perfect and clean and sparse and like fresh, ready for spring. But thinking about how if I keep the roots in, I'm actually helping my own self to have more nitrogen and have a healthier soil, which is important. I love that. Thank you. So when we're thinking about growing in small spaces, can you give us some tips and tricks about what you found to be really successful in growing in small spaces?
Yeah, essentially, I like to think about, so, like if you're container gardening, you're not getting a lot of turnover in your soils. So I would say add worms if you can. You're really going to want to increase that biodiversity. Additionally, continuing to think about your plants as neighbors, because when we think about our plants as neighbors, we know that we do really well as humans when we're exposed to lots of different types of people, right? Like our experience is more interesting, we learn more things. So really start to think about putting as many plants together as you possibly can. Those companion plants can have multiple functions, right? Like they can feed you, they can act as an insect deterrent or as a beneficiary where it brings in something that is going to take care of, say, a pest that you don't want. So for instance, lots of people love their fresh tomatoes, right? But they don't like tomato hornworms. Those suckers can decimate a tomato population in a single night, right? So a great strategy is to plant sweet alyssum underneath your tomatoes. The sweet alyssum brings in parasitic wasps, and those parasitic wasps lay their eggs onto the tomato hornworms and then eat the tomato hornworms from the inside out.
Yay.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
I love it. So yeah, I love that idea of using companion plants to strategize and fight against the pests, because I feel as if as I farm more longer and longer over time, there's just more pressure in general. Like there's more pest pressure, there's more climate pressure, there's more water pressure, erosion pressure, tons of erosion pressure, especially in Akron, Ohio. We have such huge downpours that just hit the ground, boom, 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 very violent, and then it's gone. And then your soil's just kind of eroded away afterwards. So yeah, absolutely. Using soil techniques, but also companion planting to help with that is really key.
Yeah, and the higher your soil organic matter is, the more resilient it becomes. So your basic, say, like farm field will have a soil organic matter of maybe 1 to 3%. But when we're talking about small scale, diversified fruit and vegetable gardens or farms, operations, whatever you want to call them, because they've utilized these practices, we're looking at soil organic matters between like 6 and 12%. And for every percent of soil organic matter that is in the soil, that allows the soil to mitigate rain events. So for every percent of soil organic matter you have in your soil, that will allow 1 inch of rain to filter through without puddling, ponding, or flooding per acre. So that is a lot of rain. And so when we have higher quality soils, more soil organic matter, what we find is that your soil filters better. You are also able to hang on to the moisture a little better, so you don't have that drought as soon as it stops raining for 5 days. Instead, you can really utilize dry farming. So when our soils are mulched, they stay nice and cool when it's really, really hot out. Or early in the spring, when we mulch our soils, especially say with compost, that dark color and that layer of compost makes our soils warmer so that we can plant and germinate a little bit earlier as well. So all of these soil health principles, the increasing of diversity, the keeping the soils covered, the living roots, I didn't mention one more. Trying to keep as little disturbance as possible. So I'm sure many other farmers here have talked about no-till or low-till. And the prevailing, attitude is that like, well, I have to till. Like I can't get in there unless I work that soil. The soil wants to be worked. It's nice and fluffy and delicious and it smells so good and it dries it out when it's wet in the spring. But like that's actually counter to what you want to be doing. Because if we look at our healthiest soils in the world, those healthy soils are in completely undisturbed areas. We're talking like forests and rainforests. The only thing that's happening in those forests is a lot of biodiversity, absolutely no disturbance, and a ton of life, whether we're talking above ground or below. And so like anytime we're mimicking nature, what we're going to be doing is working with nature rather than fighting against it. So when we see huge fields being tilled in the spring, what we're actually seeing is the breaking up of that soil profile, the releasing of nitrogen into the air, and we are killing the environment of those soil microbes that have worked hard all winter long to create a community there. So when we're talking about improving our soils, it's really important that we just do, crazily enough, like the bare minimum. Just keep them covered. Try not to mess with them too much. And give them food. When your tomatoes are done, let them rot, let them fall over, let them sit there all winter long. The only exception, of course, being if they are blighted or if they are showing some sort of disease pressure. Then all you have to do is just clip them off right below soil level and get rid of them. But I do encourage people to compost as well on their own. Yeah, utilizing compost is a great way to obviously divert food waste from our landfills, but also to give our soils food. I know people who the idea of like a big pile of rotting food in their yard is gross to them. So they just dig a hole in their garden and they just bury the food scraps right there. And compost gets a really bad rap. I feel bad for compost because it's pretty cool. But with the right maintenance, you can create beautiful, rich compost for not only yourself, but your neighbors as well. I'm sure many of your neighbors, especially, those of you who live in close proximity to people, they would have plenty of food waste that they would want to get rid of. So any composting program, even between a couple of households, would be really, really exceptional.
No, I agree. And can we talk briefly? I agree about the compost. It's so important. I've composted myself. I think that the problem, like you stated earlier, is that people have trouble about especially if you're in an urban environment, of like pests coming in, or like the smell of the compost. If you don't have it quite right, it can sometimes smell. So can you talk about some key compost tips that people can utilize? I love that you talked about just actually digging it into your garden, and then you don't have a lot of those issues of like pests and then also the smell. But are there other tips that you would have for doing a compost?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem with compost is that people think that if you just pile a pile of food waste, that's compost. Or even, I live in a rural area, so a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, I got some compost from the farmer down the street from me. He has really old manure that he's been composting. But old poop that's in a pile is not compost. Compost is a process, and it's a process by which, again, soil microbes work to break down those nutrients into plant-friendly food, essentially. So additionally, tilling also increases the compaction levels of fields. And so tilling essentially turns dirt particles into dust, right? It just makes those soil particles very, very small. And when they're really small and say it begins to rain, those tiny particles get smushed together. And while from our perspectives, we don't think of a raindrop as being particularly harmful, a single raindrop is significantly larger than a couple of soil particles. And so that raindrop is essentially an explosion. And it makes those soil particles start to be compacted over time. So it's not just walking on soils or driving on soils that creates compaction, but instead a consistent round of tillage. And so that tillage creates almost an impermeable surface. So water can't get in, and our roots cannot penetrate appropriately, which means that then our microbes don't have a place to congregate, to eat, and even to move through. Because if you don't have, say, like worms, because very heavy soils don't have worms, and soils that don't have any life aren't going to have worms either, because worms are going to go where there's food, right? So it's very much like creating a biodiverse environment has huge impacts in a lot of different ways. Doing things that are not good for the soil also have huge impacts in a lot of different ways. And so with that compaction and the inability of our soil microbes to eat as they want to, then we start to see our soils become depleted, and then we think, oh, we need to add some fertilizers. And so the easiest way to add a fertilizer is to do it synthetically. They're easy to manage. You just pour this cup of this into here and you spray and it's all wonderful. But unfortunately, those synthetic fertilizers are also not food for microbes. So microbes won't eat that nitrogen that is being applied. They won't eat that phosphorus that's being applied. We have to be thinking about feeding the soil in a way that actually feeds the soil, not just feeding plants, not just creating the most beautiful blemish-free product that we can, because that beautiful blemish-free product is really a result of like a genocide of like microbial life. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I agree. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I made some eggs, so Ohio fresh eggs from Ohio Farm in Wadsworth, because I don't have chickens. And I was frying it up, and then I had a little bacon from Ohio, because I love bacon. And I put on top of it was like an omelet with cheese, Ohio cheese, which is delicious. Okay, so then I put on some rosemary from my garden. And my mom was eating and my child, and they were like, my mom was like, this rosemary it's not that great, April. And I was like, she's like, where'd you get the rosemary? I was like, it's from my garden. She's like, well, it's not like the rosemary you had last year. And, I was at her house building up her soil for like 2 years. And so that was the rosemary she was talking about. And I was like, yes, mother, I just planted the rosemary. I have not done all my amendments. It will be better next year. And we had a good laugh about it. So it's exactly what you're saying, that when you work with the soil, then you're able to get really delicious, nutritious produce or even flowers that really make a difference. And you can taste the difference by working in the soil and increasing the soil content. So it's so true. My mother was right regarding the rosemary, that I had to work the soil more to engage the soil so that it's more robust, and then therefore you can taste the difference with the rosemary. It has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I feel as if I've learned a great deal. I know the listeners have learned a great deal about the soil and how you can use working in the land as therapy, acquiring land. We have covered a wide range of topics that are beneficial to anyone who is working on the land, working in the soil. Thank you so very much for coming on the podcast today and for engaging with me and for sharing all of your vast, wonderful knowledge with myself and our listeners. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or review. It really helps others to find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business, operations, and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days, and you'll never get billed. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 per year. You'll get a year of the magazine plus 150 back issues from the last 15 years. Head over to Growing for Market and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers for farmers and Growing for Market magazine.